up in the Mormon church, my concept of how Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon was that he sat at a table like this, he had the plates here, and he's running his finger across the plates looking, and he's dictating to a scribe the translation. That's visually the way the Mormon church gives you pictures of it. But when you read the statements of the people that were in the room when he did it, that's not what they describe. They describe him sitting there with a hat, and he had a little magic rock that he found digging a well that he claimed had magic properties, kind of like a crystal ball. And he'd put that stone in his hat and look in that hat, and then it would be kind of like you're texting on your phone. He'd see these sentences appear, and he'd read them off to his scribe. And the witnesses said that he couldn't go on with the next sentence unless they got it down right, unless the scribe wrote it down right. So it's a very mechanical process that they describe as happening, and yet when the church pictures it, they picture it in a scholarly way as though the plates are there. And the witnesses said there were times the plates weren't even in the room. He's just sitting there looking at his hat, dictating this book, and the plates aren't even around anywhere. Even when they're around, though, they aren't sitting on the table visible. They're always covered in a cloth or in a box. And I believe that's because he had some sort of dummy model that could be hefted and felt, but not observed unclothed. It always had to be covered.
Joseph had a seer stone that he used prior to any religious ties to Mormonism or anything with his dad, and they would go out to farms and he would pretend to look and see buried treasure, and then he would tell guys where to dig, and then they would dig there and they would like strike a root and he'd say, "That's the top of the treasure box," and then they would dig, and then he'd say, "Oh wait, the demons moved the treasure." And this is all church history. I'm not making this stuff up. So he was caught, and in a court of law, they convicted him of what do they call money digging? That was the term for it, and tried and convicted. And it was using the rock, and he admitted to his father-in-law that it was a scam. Okay, well later on he gets the Book of Mormon, and he brings it home secretly after all these years, 7 years of saying the plates were there. 7 years, he comes in, he puts the plate on the table, and he spends time with these plates under this thing, pretending to dictate those. And he does it just by supposedly looking at them. Well, that lasted not long. Then he said, well, I have a better way of translating those. And I think the guy, he just got tired of pretending to look at this fake box of plates. So he put his seer stone in a hat, and he put his face in the hat, and the sentences would come out of what the scribe was supposed to write, and he'd dictate those sentences. And him being very smart, he could have had a photographic memory. He could have had the script in the hat that he was reading. I don't know. Or maybe a demon was telling him. I don't know. But he did, for the most part of the Book of Mormon, put the stone in the hat and do it. He got tired of doing that too. And then he finally translated the Book of Mormon just by talking. Just by saying, okay, this is it. Now, Richard Bushman, who's a historian for the LDS Church and LDS, says that was how Joseph Smith learned to become a seer, is by first going to the plates directly, then using the seer stone, that God was training his mind to learn how to receive revelation, and finally he got so good at it, he didn't even need it, and he could just stand there and it would come to him. But that is exactly the process. Church history proves it. The LDS Church will admit to it. That seer stone is still in the First Presidency's office of the church today.
When you read the stories of Emma, his wife, David Whitmer, Martin Harris, even Joseph Smith's own brother, William, all testify and have gone on record and concurred that Joseph Smith used a hat and a rock. He would take the rock that he found while digging a well with his brother Hiram, the seer stone he called it. It was described as a chocolate-colored egg shape. He would put it into a hat. And David Whitmer said in his testimony that Joseph Smith would put the rock into the hat. He would take the hat, draw it up to his face to exclude the light, and in the darkness the spiritual light would shine. Something resembling parchment would appear, and on that appeared the writing. Smith would read the characters off to his principal scribe, who was Oliver Cowdery, and if read back correctly, it would go on to the next set of characters. And as David Whitmer said, this is why the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God. That's an amazing story, but it leaves out one important element. Where are the plates? He's looking at a rock in a hat. The plates were too big to put in any size hat at that time, so where are the plates? Well, as Brother William says, at one time he noticed they were lying nearby, covered up. Well, they were always covered up, but it's interesting he's not using them when he's supposedly translating the Reformed Egyptian characters on the plates into the English. He's not even looking at them. And many Mormons don't realize this. They just don't think the story through, unfortunately. And they just have in their mind's eye what the church feeds them through covers on the Ensign magazine and church manuals and things like that.
He put his head into a hat, and he saw the characters come across, and then he would write it out.
He didn't even need the plates when he was translating them. He had a curtain separating him and his scribe Oliver Cowdery. Those plates were somewhere on the ground. I don't know where they were. And he had a top hat and a couple of stones called the Urim and the Thummim. They came from the breastplate of the high priest. Somehow those were included in this package when he got this from Moroni. And so what he used to do is he would look into the top hat would be, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches, and those stones would light up, and he would go letter by letter, word by word, and he would tell the scribe what they were. And if they got it wrong, they would stop until they would get it right.
The LDS Church has actually come out and admitted that Joseph Smith used a top hat, a black top hat, and put a rock in there to translate. If he had the gold plates, why would that have been necessary?
When the angel Moroni appeared to Joseph Smith, he said there was a book deposited, written upon gold plates, giving an account of the former inhabitants of this continent, and the source from whence they sprang. He also said that the fullness of the everlasting gospel was contained in it, as delivered by the Savior to the ancient inhabitants. Also that there were 2 stones in silver bows, and these stones, fastened to a breastplate, constituted what is called the Urim and Thummim, deposited with the plates, and the possession and use of these stones were what constituted seers in the ancient or former times, and that God had prepared them for the purpose of translating the book. Joseph Smith said that each plate was 6 inches wide and 8 inches long, and not quite so thick as common tin. They were filled with engravings in Egyptian characters and bound together in a volume as leaves of a book. With 3 rings running through the whole, the volume was something near 6 inches in thickness, a part of which was sealed. In his comprehensive History of the Church, LDS historian in 70 Brigham H. Roberts quotes Martin Harris, one of the 3 witnesses whose name is found in every edition of the Book of Mormon since its original edition. Harris said that the seer stone Smith possessed was a chocolate-colored, somewhat egg-shaped stone which the prophet found while digging a well in company with his brother Hiram. Harris went on to say it was by using this stone that Joseph was able to translate the characters engraven on the plates. Martin Harris was one of the scribes Joseph Smith used to record the writing on the plates. This enabled him to give a first-hand account of how Smith performed this translation. Harris noted, by the aid of the seer stone, sentences would appear and were read by the prophet and written by Martin. And when finished, he would say written, and if correctly written, the sentence would disappear and another appear in its place. But if not written correctly, it remained until corrected, so that the translation was just as it was engraven on the plates, precisely in the language then used. Smith's wife, Emma Smith, was interviewed late in her life by her son Joseph Smith III about her knowledge of the early church. This interview took place in February 1879. At one point, Emma stated the following, "In writing for your father, I frequently wrote day after day, often sitting at the table close by him, he sitting with his face buried in his hat, with the stone in it, and dictating hour after hour with nothing between us." I'll now give you a description of the manner in which the Book of Mormon was translated. Joseph Smith would put the seer stone into a hat and put his face in the hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light, and in the darkness the spiritual light would shine. A piece of something resembling parchment would appear, and on that appeared the writing. 1 character at a time would appear, and under it was the interpretation in English. Brother Joseph would read off the English to Oliver Cowdery, who was his principal scribe, and when it was written down and repeated to Brother Joseph to see if it was correct, then it would disappear and another character with interpretation would appear. Thus the Book of Mormon was translated by the gift and power of God, and not by any power of man. If the translation was done using a seer stone, why did Joseph need to dig up the plates in the first place? If so many witnesses testify to Smith's use of a hat and a magical rock, why don't the Mormon books and periodicals, for the sake of accuracy, emphasize the fact? Why do they depict Smith sitting at a table translating the plates in a scholarly fashion?